Chapter 15. The realization began in complete stillness. Alexander wasn't thinking about espionage. He wasn't thinking about Sarah or Claire or even Lumiere. He was sitting on the floor of Max's room, back against the small bed frame, holding a plastic astronaut helmet that no longer fit anyone. Dust had settled on the bookshelf. One sock still lay beneath the dresser, half visible. The room had the preserved quality of something interrupted mid-sentence. He had come in to clear it. That was what he told himself. Instead, he sat there and replayed time both emotionally and chronologically. He forced himself to think, when did Lumiere reach stability? He closed his eyes and reconstructed it. He had gone home that night exhausted, exhilarated, certain that the hardest part was over. On Monday morning, Max was gone, taken. At the time, it had felt like escalation from a strained co-parenting situation. It seemed emotional, reactive, and personal, but the timeline now sat wrong in his mind, too tight. He stood slowly and moved to his desk. If Max's removal had truly been personal, then it should have followed its own logic. It should have had a trail of emotional cause and effect that he could trace backward and say, yes, this led to that. But when he laid the timeline flat, stripped of feeling, it didn't justify any conflict. It aligned too cleanly with a technical milestone. Lumiere reached operational stability. Within 72 hours, Max was gone, and that was what unsettled him. The speed, the precision, as if someone had anticipated the exact moment to trigger it. If it wasn't personal escalation, then it was activation. A contingency deployed the second Lumiere became valuable enough to leverage. And that meant Max hadn't been taken in anger. He opened his private logging terminal, his own encrypted archive. He kept copies of all network alerts rooted outside the official reporting chain, more out of paranoia than necessity. He scrolled back. Thursday night, nothing unusual internally. Friday, routine background scans. Saturday, a pattern he hadn't noticed before. That was the detail that finally snapped into focus. He noticed 3 failed inbound encrypted handshake attempts targeting a dormant subport of Lumiere's outer architecture. He frowned. Most research networks are bombarded constantly. Automated scanning tools sweep IP ranges looking for weak ports. That was normal, but this wasn't a blind scan. The packet structure was wrong. 3 times that night, something had tried to start a conversation with Lumiere, and they weren't aimed at the front door. They were aimed at the unused doorway buried deep in Lumiere's outer system, a part of the architecture that wasn't public, wasn't documented, and wasn't active unless he turned it on himself. No outsider should have known it was there. It looked like someone checking whether the lights had finally turned on. Lumiere didn't answer. The system rejected the connection automatically, but the message was clear. Someone wasn't searching the internet randomly. Someone was waiting for Lumiere to exist. He leaned back, mind racing. The order of events rearranged itself. It wasn't random but triggered. He opened another log. If data had been stolen, there would be signatures, unusual outbound packet bursts, encrypted tunneling spikes, timing mismatches between server activity and user presence. He scanned for any trace of them, trying to come up with an explanation for what happened that night. However, he didn't find anything obvious. If they had taken anything, they hadn't done it crudely. He leaned closer to the screen and changed the way he was searching. If someone had stolen data, there would be clear signs including large amounts of information leaving the system at odd hours, unusual outgoing traffic, something obvious. But nothing like that appeared, which meant this might not have been theft, it might have been mapping. Instead of looking at single internet addresses, he began looking at behavior. Hackers can hide where they're coming from by routing through different countries, Amsterdam one day, Singapore the next, Toronto after that. And that's exactly what he saw, a rotating list of foreign addresses touching the outer edge of Lumiere's network. On the surface, they looked unrelated. Different countries with different providers, nothing directly linking them together, but when he examined how those connections behaved, the similarity was impossible to ignore. Each one broke its data into pieces in the exact same way, each one sent almost the same size signal, each one waited the same number of seconds before trying again. It was like seeing different phone numbers call you, but all speaking in the same voice. Then he found something that made his stomach tighten. One connection, for just 11 seconds, failed to hide properly before it rerouted. Its original source traced back to a data center in Novosibirsk, Russia. That alone didn't prove state involvement, but when he searched older logs, he found the same behavioral pattern weeks earlier, this time briefly exposed through servers in Karachi and then Shanghai. Russia, Pakistan, China, they could not be random attackers, it wasn't a coincidence, this was coordinated observation. Someone, or several someones, had been quietly studying Lumiere long before he realized its true value. The pattern was too deliberate to ignore, but Alexander knew better than to trust his own fear. He needed confirmation, someone who understood how state-sponsored cyber operations actually worked, and there was only one person he trusted for that, Ethan Kovacs. Ethan specialized in forensic cyber intelligence, hired by corporations when they suspected industrial espionage but didn't want public scandal. They had met years ago at a cybersecurity conference in Zurich, where Ethan had given a talk on tracing industrial espionage networks through behavioral signatures rather than visible addresses. Alexander sent him compressed log extracts stripped of proprietary data but intact in structural pattern. Need chain analysis, full routing if possible. Alexandra's phone rang. Ethan, he said, voice tight, did you see the logs I sent? Yeah, Ethan replied, calm but sharp, compressed, stripped but structurally intact. I've gone through them. Alexander exhaled slowly. I need a full chain analysis, I need routing, everything. All right, Ethan said, give me 40 minutes, he hung up. He spent the next 40 minutes pacing with his stomach twisting, then the call came back. That's not opportunistic intrusion, Ethan said without preamble. This isn't random hackers poking at your system, it's coordinated, it's staged. Alexandra's hand tightened around the phone. Staged, exactly. Someone confirmed that Lumiere exists. They didn't steal it, they just made sure it's operational. Alexandra's mind raced. He hung up and drove straight to the lab. It was nearly midnight. Security recognized his badge but flagged the access an unusual hour. He ignored the notification. Inside, the building was silent. He accessed Lumiere's core environment and activated the Deep Packet Capture Review, a rarely used diagnostic tool that allowed him to replay historical packet traffic at the binary level. He scrubbed through the data like someone scanning security footage, frame by frame, and then he found it, a silent outbound ping response to one of the probes. They had seen Lumiere, they had confirmed it existed. 3 days later, Max vanished. His hands trembled as the phone vibrated. Ethan calling again. Tell me you didn't build this on a public subnet, Ethan said immediately. No, Alexander said. Good, Ethan replied, because whoever's mapping you isn't freelance. You traced it, Alexander asked, swallowing. Partially, Ethan said. The Novosibirsk node runs through networks tied to a Russian tech program. It's not directly military, but it's part of a larger organized effort. Military, Alexander asked, a pit opening in his stomach. Hybrid state-private, Ethan said. And worse, the same routing signatures appear in 2 other intrusion campaigns I have tracked over the past year, one linked to a Pakistani defense research intermediary. The other, a Chinese state-backed AI consortium operating under civilian tech cover. Alexandra's chest tightened. They're not rivals, Ethan continued. They work together. One does the mapping, another checks the findings, and the last handles the deals. Deals, Alexander repeated, his voice barely audible. Not theft, Ethan said. This is trade. The word lingered in Alexandra's mind. He moved to a secondary terminal and began scanning publicly available sources, academic articles, think tank reports, news briefings. Each piece alone seemed ordinary, but together he could sense a pattern, a network trading emerging technologies before governments officially acknowledged them. And Lumiere fit right in, advanced predictive systems, adaptive models, strategic algorithms, his life's work. When did this cluster activity spike? He asked Ethan. 2 months ago, Ethan said. That was when Alexander had presented preliminary Lumiere findings to Arian. The blood drained from his face. Someone had been watching long before Sarah. Max's disappearance, he believed, was tactical. Ethan, Alexander said quietly, what if the pressure wasn't digital? What if it was applied directly? A long pause, Ethan sighed. Of course, if someone wanted to make you comply without being exposed, targeting you personally would be effective. Alexander ended the call slowly. The drive home was silent. The house felt different again, charged with a sense of presence, of implication. He stepped into Max's room and tried to reconstruct the custody filing. At the time, he had assumed aggressive legal maneuvering. Now doubts gnawed at him. Had his ex-wife been pressured, bribed, threatened, or had she simply not understood what she was agreeing to? He sank onto the bed, staring at the wall. Every path led back to Lumiere. Max had vanished the moment Lumiere became real. His breathing slowed. This wasn't a custody dispute, it was positioning. Alexander allowed himself to consider a darker possibility. What if Max's removal wasn't a response to Lumiere? What if it had been part of the plan all along? What if someone had known what he was building long before he finished? He pressed his palm against the bed sheet, cold seeping into his skin. The scale wasn't staggering anymore. It was systemic, and somewhere inside that system was the reason his son had been taken. The call with Ethan ended, but the fear did not. Alexander remained seated long after the screen went dark. His mind kept circling back to the same point. Max had disappeared within days of Lumiere reaching completion. The probes had intensified just before that. Foreign interest had surfaced immediately after. If this was a planned approach, then destabilizing him would be step one. They knew nothing unbalanced him more than Max. He stood and walked slowly to the window. His reflection stared back at him, older than he remembered. But beneath the exhaustion was something sharper now, a realization that the situation had moved beyond negotiation. Governments played at layers: intelligence, legal, financial, psychological. He needed someone who understood layered conflict, someone who had lived inside it. The name came without hesitation: Malik Diop. They had met more than a decade ago during a defense research collaboration in Marseille. Malik had been assigned as security liaison, a former member of the French Foreign Legion who had already seen more than most men twice his age. They had bonded in the after hours between briefings, long conversations about what it meant to protect something that could change the balance of power. After Malik left the military, he transitioned into private security contracting. They had not spoken in months. Alexander picked up his phone and stared at Malik's contact for a long time before pressing call. The line rang. On the fourth ring, Malik answered. Alexander. His voice was deep, controlled, carrying no wasted emotion. Malik, Alexander said, and immediately heard the strain in his own voice. A small pause followed before he spoke. Alexander hesitated. He knew better than to unload everything recklessly, but he also knew that if he called Malik, he could not soften the truth. Start at the beginning, Malik said calmly, so Alexander did. He explained Lumiere's completion, the probing activity. The rotating foreign IP addresses that behaved identically despite appearing unrelated, the pattern Ethan had confirmed. He did not drown Malik in technical details, but he gave him enough to understand the scale. Then he explained everything that followed after Max was taken away. Malik did not interrupt once. When Alexander finished, the silence lasted longer than before. Have you shared this theory with anyone? Malik asked. No, good. Alexander exhaled slightly. You believe it. I believe patterns, Malik replied evenly, and what you're describing is not random, definitely. You think they pressured her? Alexander asked. I don't know, Malik answered carefully. But if someone wanted influence over you without overt violence, they would identify your emotional center and apply force there. Legal action is cleaner than abduction. It attracts less attention. Alexander sank into a chair. They've approached me from multiple directions, he said quietly. Foreign intermediaries, domestic intelligence, offers of help, offers of protection, they all want access to Lumiere, and you haven't given it, no. Then they increase pressure, Malik said simply. Malik, Alexander said, voice tightening, if this is larger than corporate espionage, if this involves multiple states, I can't rely on legal channels. I can't even be certain who's aligned with whom. That's correct, Malik said without hesitation. Alexander rubbed his forehead. Then I need someone who understands how this works. There was a subtle shift in Malik's tone. What exactly are you asking of me? He said. I need protection, Alexander replied. For Max, for myself, and I need someone who can think beyond formal structures. If this escalates, I need options. Malik let out a slow breath. Alexander, if what you're describing is accurate, you are standing at the edge of something that does not resolve neatly, he said. I'm aware. Are you? Malik asked flatly. Alexander did not answer immediately. He pictured Max's hopeful face back in the courtroom. He pictured the logs. I don't care, he said finally. He's my son. Another long pause before Malik finally spoke. I know, Malik said, softer now. If this is real, Malik continued, then you must assume you are already being observed. So what do I do? You act normal, Malik replied, until we meet. When? I will come to you, Malik said. Give me 48 hours. That's too long, Alexander said immediately. It's necessary, Malik countered. I need to prepare properly. If this involves cross-border intelligence networks, I do not walk into it casually. Alexander nodded, though Malik could not see him. What should I expect? He asked. If your analysis is correct, Malik said slowly, then you are no longer dealing with persuasion. You are dealing with something larger than us, and once we step into that space, you must be ready for discomfort. You will need to decide what you are willing to sacrifice to protect your son, reputation, alliances, perhaps more. Alexander felt something resolve settle inside him. I'm prepared, he said, Malik's voice lowered slightly. Alexander, I have operated in environments where governments deny involvement while moving pieces behind curtains. If multiple states are circling your work, then this will not be a short engagement. It will be layered, and it will test you. I understand. No, Malik said gently. You understand intellectually, you will understand emotionally soon. The words weren't threatening, they were honest. 48 hours, Malik repeated. Do nothing unusual. If anyone approaches you again, listen, do not commit. And if this is what you think it is, he let the sentence hang for a moment. Then you need to be ready for a very long and very unpredictable ride. The call ended shortly after. Alexander remained seated, phone still in his hand. He felt as though he had just activated something, and if the world had chosen to make his son suffer, then it had also just forced him to become something far more deliberate than they anticipated.